October 1st, 2013. Just after noon. Inside Glen Park Library in San Francisco, a 29-year-old man sits alone in front of a laptop. What he doesn't know is that FBI agents have spent nearly 2 years waiting for this exact moment. They cannot afford a mistake. If the man closes his laptop, critical evidence could disappear. Agents watch every movement. The screen is still on. The count is still logged in. Then, suddenly, they move. Within seconds, the man is restrained. The laptop remains open. The operation is over. The man under arrest is Ross William Ulbricht, a former physics student from Texas. According to investigators, he created Silk Road, a hidden online marketplace that handled hundreds of millions of dollars in anonymous transactions and became one of the most controversial websites in internet history. 2 years later, Ulbricht would be sentenced to 2 life terms plus 40 years in federal prison. Yet even today, many people believe he should never have received that punishment. So what exactly did Ross Ulbricht build? Why did it trigger one of the largest internet investigations ever conducted by the US government? And how did an idea about freedom on the internet end with a life sentence? To answer those questions, we need to go back to where the story began. If you enjoy true stories about people who challenge entire systems, be sure to subscribe for more. To understand why Ross Ulbricht became the target of a massive federal investigation, we need to go back long before the FBI arrived at Glen Park Library. Ross William Ulbricht was born on March 27, 1984, in Austin, Texas. He grew up in a middle-class family and was known as a bright, disciplined student. Friends and classmates remembered him as intelligent, calm, and focused on academics. Nothing about his early life suggested he would one day become the center of one of the most controversial internet cases in history. After high school, Ross studied physics at the University of Texas at Dallas. He graduated in 2006 and later pursued graduate studies in materials science at Pennsylvania State University. During these years, Ross was not involved in crime. Instead, he spent much of his time studying technology, economics, and political philosophy. He became especially interested in ideas about personal freedom and the belief that individuals should have greater control over their own lives. As the internet rapidly expanded during the late 2000s, Ross saw more than a communication network. He saw a tool that could allow people to interact and exchange value without relying on traditional institutions. After college, he experimented with several small business projects, but none achieved major success. Even so, those experiences pushed him deeper into the worlds of technology and economics. Then, in 2009, Ross discovered Bitcoin. At the time, very few people paid attention to it, but Ross immediately recognized something unusual. For the first time, money could move directly between individuals online without a bank standing in the middle. That idea fascinated him. If information could move freely across the internet, and money could move freely as well, could an entire marketplace operate the same way? That question stayed in Ross Ulbricht's mind, and it would eventually lead him to create a project the world would come to know as Silk Road. By 2010, Ross Ulbricht had spent countless hours studying Bitcoin, online privacy, and technologies that allowed users to remain anonymous on the internet. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that the internet could evolve into a place where people exchanged goods and services without relying on traditional institutions to stand in the middle. But Ross wasn't interested in keeping the idea theoretical. He wanted to build something real. Around that time, he began exploring Tor, a network designed to protect users' identities and locations online. For most people, Tor was simply a privacy tool. To Ross, it looked like the foundation for an entirely new kind of marketplace, one that could operate beyond the reach of conventional oversight. In early 2011, Ross started writing the first lines of code for a new project. He worked alone. There was no company behind him, no team of engineers, no outside investors, just a computer and an idea he believed could change the way people conducted business on the internet. Ross called the project Silk Road. The name was inspired by the ancient trade routes that once connected distant parts of the world and enabled commerce across continents. His goal was straightforward: create a marketplace where buyers and sellers could deal directly with one another using Bitcoin. In the beginning, almost nobody knew it existed. Silk Road had very few users. Ross spent time promoting the site on internet forums, answering questions, and encouraging people to give the platform a chance. At first, traffic was minimal, but slowly the first users began to arrive. Small transactions started taking place. New accounts appeared. For Ross, it was proof that the idea could work in the real world. Yet, as the platform grew, another problem began to emerge. Ross quickly realized that he could not fully control what people would choose to buy and sell on the marketplace. And before long, Silk Road started attracting attention from groups of users he may not have anticipated when he first launched the project. That was the moment everything began to change. By the end of 2011, Silk Road was no longer a small project known by only a handful of people. Its user base continued to grow. Transactions were taking place every day. Bitcoin was moving through the platform on a constant basis. As the site expanded, the content appearing on Silk Road began to change as well. At first, Ross had envisioned the platform as a free marketplace on the internet. But as more and more people joined, he could no longer fully control everything happening inside the system. Controversial products and listings began to appear. Many users were no longer coming to Silk Road because of technology or online privacy. They were coming for things that traditional websites would never allow. Traffic increased so rapidly that Ross found himself spending nearly all of his time running the platform. He handled technical issues, resolved disputes between users, monitored servers, answered messages. What had started as a project built by one person was now operating like a marketplace that never seemed to sleep, running almost 24 hours a day. It was also during this period that Ross began using the name Dread Pirate Roberts more frequently, a pseudonym that would soon become well known across the internet. And while Silk Road continued to expand, the first law enforcement agencies were beginning to hear rumors about the website's existence. At the time, few people could have predicted just how much attention Silk Road was about to attract. But the platform was growing larger every month. And for the first time, it was beginning to appear on the radar of investigators. By early 2012, Silk Road had grown large enough to attract the attention of U.S. law enforcement. At first, DEA agents began noticing online discussions about a hidden marketplace that could only be accessed through the Tor network. That marketplace was called Silk Road. Unlike ordinary websites, it didn't appear on Google, had no public office, and no company openly operating it. But investigators soon discovered that thousands of transactions were taking place inside the platform. To find out what was really happening, federal agents launched undercover investigations. They created accounts, made test purchases, and gradually gained access to the marketplace. What they found quickly expanded the case. Silk Road was no longer just a small corner of the internet. It had become a rapidly growing online marketplace. As evidence accumulated, more agencies joined the investigation. The FBI, ours, and the Department of Homeland Security. Each team pursued a different lead. Some focused on Bitcoin transactions. Others tracked user activity. And some worked to identify the servers behind the platform. But there was one major obstacle. No one knew who was running Silk Road. The only name investigators kept seeing was Dread Pirate Roberts, a pseudonym, not a real identity. Meanwhile, Ross Ulbricht continued operating the site, unaware that federal investigators across the country were beginning to piece together the first clues. The manhunt had officially begun, but neither side knew it would take more than a year before the case finally reached its conclusion. By mid-2012, the Silk Road investigation began making significant progress. After months of collecting data, investigators realized that trying to identify Dread Pirate Roberts through the live operation of the website was getting them nowhere. Tor and Bitcoin made it extremely difficult to determine the identity of the person behind the platform. So they changed their approach. Instead of focusing on the Silk Road of the present, they started looking into its past. Investigators combed through old internet posts connected to Silk Road from the earliest days of the website. They reviewed forum discussions, comments, and promotional messages that had been posted months before. That was when an important lead appeared. In one early promotional post about Silk Road, investigators discovered a trail that led to an email address. The email was not registered under the name Dread Pirate Roberts, but it opened an entirely new direction for the investigation. From that email, investigators began following additional pieces of information. Individually, none of them seemed particularly important, but when they were connected together, they all pointed toward the same person: Ross Ulbricht. For the first time since the investigation began, federal agents had a real name to focus on. However, suspicion was not the same as proof. Investigators still needed to demonstrate that Ross was in fact the person operating under the Dread Pirate Roberts identity. Meanwhile, Ross continued running Silk Road as usual. The website kept growing. Transactions continued to flow through the platform. The community continued to expand. What Ross didn't realize was that the distance between himself and federal investigators was shrinking rapidly. The manhunt was no longer aimed at an anonymous online alias. It was beginning to focus on a real person. And from that moment forward, Ross Ulbricht became the primary suspect in the entire Silk Road investigation. By early 2013, the Silk Road investigation had entered a critical phase. After months of following digital trails, federal investigators were becoming increasingly convinced that Ross Ulbricht was the man behind the Dread Pirate Roberts identity. However, they still needed direct evidence before they could make an arrest. From that point forward, Ross came under much closer surveillance. Investigators gathered information about his daily routine, where he lived, and the places he regularly visited. They wanted to understand how Ross worked, how he used his computer, and most importantly, find an opportunity to obtain evidence that could not be disputed. Meanwhile, Silk Road continued to operate. Its user base kept growing. Transactions continued to take place every day. To most people inside the marketplace, Dread Pirate Roberts remained the mysterious figure running the platform from behind the scenes. But outside that world, the investigation was steadily closing in. One of the FBI's biggest concerns was Ross's laptop. Investigators believed that if Ross managed to lock or shut down his computer at the right moment, a significant amount of critical evidence could become inaccessible. That meant everything had to be timed perfectly. Investigation teams began developing multiple operational scenarios. They analyzed Ross's computer habits, studied the public places where he frequently worked, and searched for the safest opportunity to act. During their surveillance, one location appeared repeatedly throughout the investigation: the Glen Park Library in San Francisco. Ross often brought his laptop there and worked for hours at a time. To the agents, it looked like the best opportunity they had ever had. The arrest plan began to take shape. Surveillance teams were assigned. Specific responsibilities were given to each agent. Every detail revolved around a single objective: approach Ross while his laptop was still open. Because if they succeeded, an investigation that had lasted nearly 2 years would finally come to an end. If they failed, one of the largest internet cases in U.S. history could lose its most important piece of evidence. And as October 2013 approached, both Ross Ulbricht and the federal agents were moving closer and closer to their final confrontation at Glen Park Library. October 1st, 2013. Just after noon, Ross Ulbricht walked into Glen Park Library as if it were any other day. He made his way to a familiar spot, sat down, and opened his laptop. For the next several minutes, nothing seemed unusual. Ross worked, read messages, monitored activity across the system. Everything unfolded exactly as it had dozens of times before. But this time, federal agents were no longer watching from a distance. They were waiting for the one moment the investigation required. The laptop was still running. The account remained logged in. The data was still right in front of them. Then the moment arrived. According to later investigative reports, a brief distraction occurred near Ross's table. For a few seconds, his attention shifted away from the screen. That was the signal. The agents moved immediately. They approached from multiple directions at the same time. Everything happened in seconds. Ross never had a chance to touch the keyboard. No chance to close the laptop. No chance to log out. When the arrest was over, the very thing the FBI had spent nearly 2 years pursuing was still sitting in front of them. The laptop remained open. The active session was still running. For investigators, it was the most important moment of the entire case. For the first time, they were able to access a system they believed was connected to Silk Road while it was still actively operating. Ross Ulbricht was arrested inside the library. A manhunt that had lasted nearly 2 years had finally come to an end. But for the US government, this was not the end of the story. Because what investigators would soon find inside that laptop would become the centerpiece of one of the most famous internet trials in American history. After Ross Ulbricht was arrested at Glen Park Library, investigators quickly shifted their attention to the laptop that was still running on the table. This was the moment they had been preparing for over nearly 2 years. Digital forensic specialists immediately began documenting the data displayed on the screen. Unlike a typical search and seizure, the device was still logged in and actively running when it was taken into custody. What they found inside quickly captured the attention of investigators. Numerous files related to the operation of Silk Road were discovered. Administrative notes, activity logs, conversations between the Dread Pirate Roberts account and other members of the platform. As time went on, the amount of data recovered continued to grow. Investigators began comparing the information found on the laptop with the evidence they had collected throughout the investigation. Many details that had once been only suspicions were now starting to line up. The timelines matched. The administrative activity matched. Information connected to Silk Road appeared repeatedly throughout the data. For federal prosecutors, this represented a major breakthrough, because their goal was not simply to show that Ross was connected to Silk Road. They needed to prove that Ross himself was the person operating the platform under the alias Dread Pirate Roberts. Over the following weeks, the analysis expanded even further. Digital forensic experts, investigators, and federal prosecutors all worked together to review the massive volume of evidence that had been seized. The more they analyzed, the clearer the overall picture became. Meanwhile, news of the arrest began spreading across the country. For many people, it was the first time they had ever heard the name Silk Road. American media outlets quickly pushed the story onto front pages and national headlines. A mysterious website operating on the Tor network, a massive online marketplace, and a 29-year-old man arrested inside a public library in San Francisco. But for the US government, the investigation was far from over, because the next stage would be the greatest challenge of all: presenting that evidence in federal court and convincing a jury that was enough to prove Ross Ulbricht's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In early 2015, after more than a year of investigation and case preparation, Ross Ulbricht's case officially went to trial in federal court in Manhattan, New York. This was no longer a digital investigation, no longer a search across the internet. Now the entire case was placed before a jury. Federal prosecutors began presenting the evidence they had gathered during the Silk Road investigation. They argued that Ross Ulbricht was not merely involved with the platform. He was the person who created and operated Silk Road under the alias Dread Pirate Roberts. Before the jury, prosecutors introduced data recovered from the laptop, communication records, activity logs, and numerous documents related to the operation of the marketplace. According to their argument, this evidence demonstrated that Ross played a central role in every aspect of Silk Road's operation. Meanwhile, the defense team presented a very different narrative. They did not deny that Ross had been connected to Silk Road during its early stages. However, they argued that the story was far more complicated than prosecutors suggested. According to the defense, Silk Road had grown far beyond its original size, and other individuals may have taken part in operating the platform at different points in time. The legal battle continued for weeks. Numerous witnesses were called to testify. Digital forensic experts presented their findings. Investigators explained how the evidence had been collected. Inside the courtroom, jurors were asked to examine an enormous amount of information, not just technical data, but the most important question in the entire case. Was Ross Ulbricht truly Dread Pirate Roberts throughout the life of Silk Road? As the trial moved toward its final stage, media attention continued to grow. Many viewed it as one of the most significant internet-related criminal cases ever brought before an American court. Then, after weeks of testimony and arguments, the moment both sides had been waiting for finally arrived. The jury was preparing to deliver a verdict that would determine the future of Ross Ulbricht. In February 2015, after days of reviewing evidence and deliberating, the jury returned to the federal courtroom in Manhattan. Ross Ulbricht sat quietly and waited. After weeks of testimony and arguments, the trial had finally reached its most important moment: the verdict. When the decision was announced, the jury found Ross Ulbricht guilty on the major charges related to Silk Road. For federal prosecutors, it marked the conclusion of an investigation that had taken years to build. But for Ross, it was only the beginning of another legal battle. A few months later, the case moved into the sentencing phase. Prosecutors pushed for severe punishment, arguing that Silk Road had created an unprecedented online marketplace unlike anything the internet had seen before. Meanwhile, the defense asked for leniency, arguing that an extremely harsh sentence would not fully reflect the circumstances of the case. In the end, the judge made the final decision. Ross Ulbricht was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 40 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole under the original sentence. The sentence immediately sparked controversy. Some viewed it as a powerful message from the U.S. government toward platforms operating outside the law. Others argued that the punishment was excessively harsh compared to many other technology-related criminal cases. In the years that followed, debates surrounding Ross Ulbricht, Silk Road, and internet freedom continued to emerge. But regardless of where people stood on the issue, the Silk Road case became a major milestone in the history of the modern internet. It was a story that began with the idea of building a free marketplace online and ended with one of the most famous technology trials in American history. Then,